Hi, this is Jack with the Veterans in Your Corner podcast. Welcome to episode number 6, and this is the first time that you've seen my face. I hope you come back. I'm in my office today. This is where I edit the podcasts. We've been a few weeks in between our last podcast. That's because of me. I've gotten behind. I'm not a professional, so it takes me a while to do all these edits. I'm going to ask you a question. Chaplain Clue and myself want to help as many people and veterans and their families as we possibly can. So if you have a suggestion on a podcast episode, on a podcast series, or if there is someone that you would like us to speak with, why don't you let us know in the comments below, or go to compasscourses.net, email Dr. Jack Clue, and let us know there. All right, in today's episode, we speak with Debbie Trombley. Episode number 4, we spoke with Debbie's husband, John Trombley, and she brings the energy. So I know you're going to like this podcast. You're not going to get bored. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about today's podcast. I'm going to let Debbie speak for herself. That's enough for me. Let's get to the podcast.
You know, one of the things they can't do is love me when I'm not there.
They had no idea what to expect, and they were not prepared for the pressures that their new husband was not going to be there at 5 o'clock for dinner every night. The biggest shock in the world for a military wife is being all the way across the country and having your first baby and having nobody.
Well, we have Debbie Trombley next. We had John in here. He did a great job. What?
You got to get the mic a little closer to your face.
He doesn't like the way I do this. And so I did think, Debbie, you'll be our number 7 podcast conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
lucky number 7.
If you would take some time, and because this is a Veterans in Your Corner podcast, and what we want to do is educate the public on the military experience. Less than 1%, I say it every week, served in the military. And so the chances of someone on the street knowing anything is pretty unlikely. So, or even family members. I know when we came back from Panama, we had a very traumatic 3 days experience. It was very scary. And yet when we get back in Houston, it was time to go to Denny's. I mean, it was completely disconnected from what we had. So we want to help color it in. And what we want is the spouse's perspective. Last week we had Kathy Krogstad talk about her experience as a military spouse.
My experience is a little bit different than the regular active duty person because I came into the military, and I say I came into the military. I served all those 30 years along with John, and people don't realize that you serve as a family. You know, your husband is the one that is out in front, but you serve as a family. And my experience in the military was a little bit different because my husband came through pilot training. And I met him in San Antonio, Texas, and he knew what airplane he was going to be flying because he was going back to Anchorage, Alaska, where his guard unit was.
Now, he mentioned, I'm just curious, point of curiosity, that you guys met at the Officers Club at Fort Sam.
Correct.
I've been there. So what was the occasion? I can understand John being there. What were you being there at the time?
The occasion of me being there is that every Friday evening, there was an opportunity for a band to be there. And of course they let all the women in because what would the guys do if there was no one to dance with or meet? And so our experience was a little bit different. We came back and John got a job and he flew. You know, so it was like 2 careers going at once.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, the passion of his heart, of course, was to fly. And, you know, that was just a really neat experience when we were in Columbus Air Force Base, Mississippi. And I went through pilot training with him. I read the checklist to him. I knew as much about flying as I could learn about flying, though he got to go do it.
Right.
You know, and so when he graduated from pilot training, it was quite momentous. It was one of his heart passions. You know, I gave up one of my passions to follow this guy. Oh. We met in San Antonio, and I was in the process of applying for airline stewardess position with Texas International Airlines. And I let that go and followed the man of my dreams, and ended up in pilot training in Columbus. And I think one of the most exciting experiences as far as for the two of us together in the military was when I got to pin on those wings when he graduated from pilot training, because he knows and I knew I was right there every step of the way, and yet had kind of an interesting role. John and I were one of the old people at pilot training.
Okay.
He was 23, I was 26.
Okay.
Yeah. And most of the women were 21, newly married, and the guys were fresh out of college and starting pilot training. So we were kind of the old folks, and got the experience of having these young men and even some of the young marrieds come to us and say, well, how do you do this? And what are you doing? And, we really didn't have any idea, Jack, but we did have a couple of years of life experience. And we saw that there was this area that was kind of like a little bit of a magnet with couples. And we kind of pondered that. And so really we kind of feel like even back then when we didn't know anything and we didn't really have that personal relationship with Jesus Christ, there was something knocking at the door of what we were destined to be involved in. So I went to work. I thought, well, I'm not going to sit around and eat bonbons and go to the swimming pool every day. I went to work, which was my position as the wife of the group leader for his section. I was not really present to sit at the pool. I went to work at the lock and dam. I worked out at a computer on the lock and dam. And so I was a little bit disconnected from the everyday. And yet,
how did that go? What years were this?
Well, this would have been back in 1976, 77.
Okay.
Right there.
So what difference did that make in terms of the social expectation of your role in the unit?
Well, I sort of abdicated it.
Okay. But am I correct in assuming there was a role that you were expected to fulfill?
And there was somewhat. You were the contact person, and if there was anything that needed to be headed up, like who was going to do the potluck and who was going to do the graduation gift, you were the one that kind of got the women together and got that going. But like I said, I just, at that point in my life at 26, I wasn't interested in being a babysitter. And some of that was definitely necessary. But I ended up working at the lock and dam.
So babysitting, you mean like the other wives?
That's right.
Or, okay.
Some of them were just very, very immature. They had no idea what to expect. And they were not prepared for the pressures that their new husband was not going to be there at 5 o'clock for dinner every night. And that, the military life, you are not your own.
Well, it came first.
Absolutely. And they had no idea at 19 and 20, especially, that was the cost or the sacrifice.
So how was it hard for you to adapt to that?
Actually, it wasn't. Jack, I'm part gypsy. I love change and I love to move. And I am a woman of high possibilities. And so that did not bother me much at all. In fact, I will tell you my experience before John and I were married. I was married to my first husband, who was a military man. And so at 19, I left home, went to Oklahoma, went to Georgia, had my children. And, the biggest shock in the world for a military wife is being all the way across the country and having your first baby and having nobody there at all, and trying to figure out, oh my goodness, and the responsibilities of the military are here you are as this young wife, and yikes.
Yikes. Give us a story about yikes. Does anything come to mind?
Well, many times, there's a sick child, You are recovering yourself. You have to drive yourself to that hospital, sit in that clinic all night long, and do those things. You just did what you needed to do the best that you could do it. And it was always a blessing if there was someone that even had an inkling of what kind of support you needed, because it didn't come forth naturally. Everybody's involved with their life, and they think that you're just getting along, and isn't that wonderful? And it's like, I look out here and I think, I'm out shoveling my driveway, and the neighbor across the street has the snow blower. He's home every night. Mine is in South America, and it's like, they just don't get it. Okay, well, I can't be angry, but it's kind of like, wow.
Yeah.
It would be nice to be asked, can I take care of your driveway for you?
Yeah, that's what I was kind of going to say, because I'm thinking, I have this vision of the strong, and obviously you are strong and you're driven and you know what you want, but like the strong military wife who can do everything on her own and who's willing to and who wants to. But it sounds like it would have been nice, or it would be nice for people to actually come out and not be scared to ask if you need help.
Yeah, to be asked would be wonderful, and to you are more courageous, more bold, more assuming to those things, because you have to be.
Yeah.
And especially when you are far, far away from any relatives or any home. And that also comes into play because we were in the Air Guard, not the active Air Force base. Things on the base are different. That is a cultured community. In our experience here in Fargo for the last number of years, we came here. This culture is already fairly well centered around family. The Guard was nice that they had their airplanes and stuff. That was cool. But there wasn't really a Guard family to connect with. And there was no physical family to connect with. So, you just kind of like, the woman digs up the friends, okay, and the relationships, and you go from there. So it was a little bit different than the active duty. Active duty was great. You would go from base to base. There was always a chapel, always a commissary, always a BX. You knew where headquarters was. You knew where the swimming pool was. You knew where the MWR, the welfare family recreational area. Yeah. And so those things were very familiar, and there was much more cohesiveness relationship-wise.
Well, and you would go on a base and you knew you were there.
That's right. And it was sort of home.
And it was a special place because not everybody had access.
Well, not everybody had access, but I think the most important thing for families is you knew what to expect.
Did you see something in military men that you didn't see in a civilian? Was there...
Interesting. I think the passion to serve above their own need, I think that you found a strength and a resolve that maybe you didn't see. They had seen things and been involved in things that the everyday man couldn't fathom or understand. There was the brotherhood of the military because of the common experience. And I think also there was a real reliance on the wife to keep it together.
Well, I was going to ask you that. That's good. Perfect timing for my question is, what do you remember about how the kids experienced news? Hey, we're moving, or sometimes this coincides with a school summer being out. Sometimes it doesn't.
And we didn't have a huge experience along that line. Being in the Guard, I would say, two of the highlights for me being in the military, one, pinning on my husband's wings. The other was being a part of our move to North Dakota from Anchorage, Alaska. Because in Anchorage, John was flying and gone 50% of the year. And when he was home, he had to fulfill his flight currencies. So he was gone in the evenings, another 1 or 2 nights a week when he was there. And so that puts an extra stress on the family for sure, because he's gone, although he's having a good time doing it because he's loving flying.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like.
That's what God made him for. He loved it. In fact, it was my fault that he actually jumped in and pursued it, because he was doing these different jobs and flying with the Guard. And of course, being the woman, I really kind of wanted some security here. Like, don't you think that it would be good to have some benefits? And a regular paycheck? Ooh, what a concept. And yet knowing that he wanted to fly, but there was no active duty spot there for him. And I said, well, he was sitting on the bed one evening with his arms back over behind his neck. And I just said, what do you want to do when you grow up? This was an honest question.
How old are you guys at that time?
Oh my goodness. 30s. What do you want? What would you do if you could do anything? And he says, I just want to fly. And I said, then go do it. Not realizing the cost, personally.
To you, yes.
And I knew that meant going out there, getting as many hours as he could so he could go from the right seat to the command seat, which would give him a credential and a possible opportunity there. And so knowing that I gave him that permission, there were two things. One, there was a cost, but the other was the delight in watching him bloom and grow in what he was made to do.
Did you, this may be uncovering, don't do it if you don't want, but was there ever a time when you guys weren't in alignment about what life was becoming? About that, you're sharing him with the Air Force.
Right. I guess that wasn't an issue. It was more of an issue for us, his coming and going, and how we emotionally handled that. Because he would go for 2 weeks, and then he would come home. I was the boss for those 2 weeks, my friend. And he was out doing his thing and just going to do nothing more than come back and take his role as the husband and the head of our family. And we would go back and forth in this dynamic tension, not understanding what it was at first. I mean, he'd be gone a month sometimes. Sometimes it'd just be for a week, and it was this grind. And until we realized that we were in this constant fluid changing of roles, that John said, well, I'll give you about 3 days to give it back to me.
Yeah, because what he said, it sounded like he liked to put that husband hat on. He's ready to come home and just put that husband hat on. And it sounds like there was a transition between when he gets to just come over here and start making choices. That hat.
We
have the same experience in my house. Obviously, it's a little different because I'm not in the military. But
sure.
So I own a snow lawn care business, snow removal. I'm at home quite a bit. So after the spring season and the fall season ends, and then Kayla sees me home. It's a change. I'm like, hey, why isn't this done? I could be doing this. Or she sees me doing something a lot, and she probably is assuming, do you think I should be doing that more? Because I have it under control already, but why are you doing it so much? So I guess I understand that.
I know when I retired, Tina felt that I was in the way, because...
Well, that's another story, transition, from retirement. But, that back and forth was a huge thing to understand, and to be able to give each other enough grace to be able to float back. And yet you knew it wasn't permanent, you knew that he was going to get excited. Here's the other thing that happened. He was always leaving, but men leave 24 hours before they physically leave. And so he was gone to Panama on that wonderful, exciting trip that he was taking. And I was like, I want to hold on to you as long as I can before you leave. And he was like, I'm gone. And once, I think that was an educational piece for every married couple who experience traveling, whether you're a trucker who is constantly gone. They deal with the same kind of come and go thing, or pilot, or anywhere in the military, or any kind of job that you have that requires that. The main thing for a married couple to understand is that these are the dynamics. You will feel this way. It's not wrong to feel this way, but you need to understand it and then give each other grace to handle coming back to that role.
And if you don't?
And if you don't, you will have lots of fights. You will have division. And when he is home or she is home, you will have a horrible time. And you will be glad they're leaving. And then you'll feel guilty. And then you'll be sad.
Well, it sounds like
what if something happens to them while they're gone?
So it sounds like that happened because you're describing that in detail. So until you figured out, he's gone for 24 hours before he's actually gone.
Yeah.
How did you come to that conclusion where, okay, wait, he's gone in his mind and it's not me, it's him.
Well, and you have to decide to take that role back.
Well, and one of the things I'm seeing, there's this kind of like this inanimate object that's doing all this, and that is you both are in the military, so to speak, and this is this. We
don't have control over it.
No, and that really comes first. That's why we call it military service.
That's right.
And you're serving, just not getting paid.
That's right.
So, no, I appreciate you saying that, Debbie, because as a chaplain, I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people over the years. And, when they look back on it, it's 20 years after the fact that they say, I think that's what was happening, that dynamic. We never gave grace because we were fighting.
Well, you didn't understand.
Yeah, they didn't understand.
You didn't understand. And so that's, one of our heart passions is, if we get a chance to talk to a military young couple, knowing today there's tons of deployments. Yes. I mean, it is just a part of your life. It wasn't necessarily that way 30 years ago.
Right.
I can remember when John retired from the Air Force and, they had, the ceremony for him out at the base. And that was kind of my second wonderful thing that happened because he retired. He got a chance to say a few words. And you know what? They even let me say a few words. I think the expectation is, it was so wonderful, and I got to be a military wife, and but my track was not that to share. Mine was that I had gotten involved in the military family program a couple years before we retired, and my opportunity to just speak my heart and use the confidence of what I knew was to say, every spouse in here has served. Everyone. And now there is a program that is in place and is in development that can help you feel and do an even better job and have an even better relationship. It's the family program. And when that first came about, there was a lot of folks in the men in the military that kind of poo-pooed the military program, the family program. And I got a chance to say that, and I'll tell you what, it wasn't more than 1 or 2 years that the deployments to Iraq were happening, and the acceleration of that program came to great prominence. It's like because they understood. And it takes, the empathic listening with your heart. For the one that's out there loving serving, I mean, John loved to go to South America where he might get shot at in his airplane, so to speak. And I was the one at home taking care of the details, really concerned and hoping that nothing.
How did you cope with that? John shared a couple stories. How did you cope with, because you only got partial pictures.
Yeah.
Snapshots. How did you cope with it?
Snapshots. I guess the major thing as far as me coping with it is, I had a strong relationship with Jesus Christ in prayer. When I was in Alaska, I think one of my greatest strengths was having some girlfriends that were amazing. And they got it, and they heard me, and I could hear them. And I had a friend in Alaska, and have a friend, 40 years. Her, Vicki and Michael Bloom. And Vicki was my friend. And, I could share with her, wow, he's going. Who else would I share with but something that got me? The other thing was John's parents were active duty military. And my mother-in-law got it because my father-in-law flew in World War II. And she was in France and she was in Germany. And she was the one that shepherded tons of military wives. I learned from her, Jack. Oh, I learned from her.
Give me some
power.
of the things. Tell us one or two things that you learned from your mother-in-law.
Well,
military
about
stuff.
the military, the importance of hospitality and being inclusive, inviting people into your home and loving them,
taking that
making
initiative.
them feel important and a part of something that was fun outside of worrying. The other thing I learned is I would hear her talk about her experiences in Europe with the women, and the men would be deployed on a bombing mission or whatever their mission was, and some of the women were like falling apart. And my mother-in-law was a strong woman. She lost her father at a very young age, and she was very much kind of the head of the kids in her family. And so she had a strength there to begin with. But she said, hey, buck up here. We're going to get it together. We're going to go have some fun. We're going to take care of what everybody's needs are. She had her own little family program, I'm telling you. And she would tell those women, hey, you don't have time to feel sorry for yourself or to worry. You have more important things on the docket. You are the one that's here. Your kids need you. You need to be strong. You can't fall apart. He's coming home. What's he going to come home to?
Because in one sense, she was like a trainer of women.
Yes.
Well, it sounds like to me it's when John was talking about the common experience he has with people that have been in the military. Do you feel that same way when you get into a group of women who have had their husbands deployed or they're in the military, where there's this common experience? Because
absolutely,
now you guys have had this team.
Absolutely. Fun, quick little story. I was standing in line to see President Trump. And in front of me was this very sweet looking young lady. And I thought, I'm going to be here for 4 hours. I got to talk to someone. You know me. I have that need. And so I struck up a conversation with this gal, Kelly. And I just said, well, tell me about you. And she said, well, my husband Dan is in the military. And I said, I'm a retired military wife. And we found out, oh my gosh, our lives were very much the same. Do you know, in 4 hours, we were fast friends. And, I have this wonderful knack of being around my friends, and they get sent out of the winter and into the sunshine. She is in Tennessee now. But, we are bonded forever. We'll be able to pick it up wherever, and I'll know, your son is in the military, so is mine. This was the challenge there, so was mine. How did you handle this? Yep, got that. And she says, I haven't been able to talk to anyone that gets me for
Debbie,
years.
Do me a favor. Let her know about this. We're preparing to interview people by way of either Zoom.
Oh, she would be wonderful.
Well, that
for
would
you,
be great. And,
Jack.
please do that. Direct her to us and let her know what we're doing. Give her my phone number or my email address.
I will.
That's great. So your mother-in-law was a key player in the formation of how to do the military
She
spouse.
was kind of the silent example. I mean, I had my year in Columbus, Mississippi, and then we went to Anchorage, Alaska. And that's where John's family was. And so I would be around her.
Now, you're positive, and I get all that. Was there any time in your military career experience that you thought, I am tired of this? I don't want to do this anymore. Did anything like that ever come up?
I think probably I was feeling really tired of him being gone. When we were in Alaska, I was working full time. Blake was at that point 6 years old. And, I was kind of tired of him loving it so much and being gone.
How many years into it was that?
2 years of being gone that much. Other than that, being in the Air Guard, keeping your currency, he was gone 1 or 2 nights a week. I that was just sort of expected. But then this was gone. And he was just loving it. And he was going fabulous places, Hawaii, Japan, all over the world. And I was eating hot dogs, shoveling the sidewalk, and making nice with some of the family challenges. And then the water heater would go out. And then someone at work would go brain dead. And I was like, you know.
Spiritually, talk about that. How, when you don't have other, someone to press the flesh with to go through that, spiritually, how did you rely on the things of God, your spiritual life, to balance you?
We definitely did. And about that point, we had just discovered a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. But, the difficult thing, here we were in this church, lovely church, and I was trying to connect. And they said, well, we can't be friends with you. I said, why not? He says, because you're going to leave.
Oh.
Okay.
That had a double meaning.
Because I'm going to leave. And then of course, your real question is, well, then why should I be nice to you? But, in that hunger for wanting to find a place to belong and find some support, and knowing that we have the commonality of the relationship with Jesus Christ, but I can't open myself up to you because you're going to leave, and it would be too hurtful for me to lose that relationship. And I thought, how do you think I feel?
Right.
But people,
sometimes they don't realize what they're saying.
No, but that's a common comment and a comment ingredient. If they find out you're military, you're over there, I'm over here, I don't get you. I don't know if I want to get you or if I could, but I like you.
But
you're okay.
And on the flip side, if you're on post or on base, everybody
they
understands
all get it.
that.
Yeah, you have that commonality. So for me being here, it was kind of that darned if you do and darned if you don't. And every once in a while you find this little woven piece where people just receive you for who you are. But finding that person that gets it, that's really, really
a friend
fun.
that sticketh closer than a brother. A brother is born for the day of adversity.
And you understand the brotherhood of the military and what I would call the sisterhood. And there's men that stay at home with wives, active duty. I understand that too, of the common experience and how powerful that is for feeling safe, trusted, and understood.
What would you say to a church person, preparing them? Let's just imagine, so-and-so's coming to town and they're military. What would be some tips that you would give at your church to help people, connect?
Yeah, to be able to connect.
What would you say to church folks that have no orientation? What would they need to know?
I think the most important thing is like, hey, grab this family and take them out to lunch. Ask them what it's like to be in the military. Be curious. Be a part of their life. Learn. Just like you do about all of the people that relocate here. We talk about all the people that relocate in our area from other countries. Well, I am going to tell you that being in the military is like being from Mars.
Yes.
It really is. And this is Earth and that's Mars. And you're appreciated. You love that you're appreciated. That's so but there's nothing more than being personally embraced and understood.
How would a church person know that they're being effective in what you're suggesting? How would they know? What would the outcome be if they did that well?
Well, the outcome would be is that you would get a response from that military person that would ask you into their life more, want to share things, ask you to partner in prayer and see what you would do. Even though you don't understand why or what, this is my life. Can you empathically hear my heart and partner and walk with me? Walk with me.
You said, as a chaplain, you said chapel earlier when we were talking today. What was your experience with a military chapel?
Well, John and I got married in a military chapel, and what an interesting experience. I never knew that you could have something that looked like a flip It's like one side is this, and then it turned,
Oh,
and
the
it
cross,
was this.
yeah.
Oh my gosh!
Right,
You
and the
know,
crucifix.
it accommodated everybody,
It did.
and I thought that was pretty cool.
And that's even possible.
I know it.
And it's been around for a long time.
I know, but I had no idea back at 26 that those things even existed, and so I thought, wow.
What chapel? Where was this?
It was in Columbus Air Force Base.
Okay.
Yeah. Still there, by the
Still
way.
there.
We
Yeah,
went
been
there
there.
like maybe 7 years ago. Still
Uh-huh.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was interesting.
So a chaplain married you guys? Or a minister friend?
It was a priest
A priest.
that married us.
All right.
And I can't say that we were terribly connected at that point.
Right.
We were more interested in going to the club on Friday night, and John was gone and studying, and that
Well,
was
I'm
not
just
a huge part
my
of our
only
life.
reason for asking is just that military chapels provide a service
Absolutely.
and a function, and
Yep.
you had some contact with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was great. We had our wedding there.
Mhm. Was it a big wedding?
Oh no. John's family's from Alaska. Mine's from Oregon. I came from Texas. We were in Mississippi. No. But, we did have a very neat wedding. We had a military wedding, and John had the guys in
Oh,
his
sure.
unit. And so they had the swords, and most of their wives, if they were married, were invited. My parents came, my sister came, John's family, a good number of them came down, so we had some family there. Not very many of what I would call some of my old friends. They aren't going to pick up and fly from Texas to Mississippi for,
Right.
but, I don't know how many people were there, like maybe 50,
Okay.
maybe,
So now
which was great. We had a lot of food left, and, it was just not a big deal,
okay.
our wedding.
Was and ours was kind of like that as well. You have 4 children total?
There are 4.
4. So the 3 younger ones, how much military life did they experience with you?
The only one that experienced military life with us was Blake.
Okay. So what do you think was
Our
the
youngest.
effect? Because he ended up going to the Marine Corps, and then he went in the Army.
Yep.
So what was it like for Blake? You're having some of this consternation, and trying to feel good about sharing John with the Air Force. How did that affect Blake?
I really don't think it affected him at all, because he
Okay.
was so young.
Uh-huh.
He was like 5,
Mm-hmm.
and his world was kindergarten.
Okay.
And those kinds of things. He knew his dad was gone. He missed wrestling with him. And John would always come home and say, I need to beat up our boy. He's just not used to wrestling. He's been around women too much. Come on.
Yeah, right.
And, to bring that male influence into his life was, recognized. But I think probably later on, after we came here, and John was traveling, I thought it was interesting that Blake made a comment not too very long ago, and he says, I don't know my dad like I know you in some ways, because I was there, and he could talk to me, and we would talk about stuff, and, John just wasn't there as much.
So Blake was in the military.
Yeah.
Okay. And so was he deployed overseas?
Yes, twice.
Okay. So how was it different seeing him leave compared to when you saw your husband leave?
Oh, it was
for
way
something?
worse.
It was worse.
Oh my gosh. It was traumatic in many ways.
Huh.
It was like, I'd rather have John go. John would rather have gone, I think, in some respects too, maybe. But I found it as his mother extremely difficult.
The difficulty came where? Just not knowing?
Emotionally, and knowing that your child is in the war zone, and he's on this big, huge piece of equipment that is a bomb sweeper. And, it was just like every day he was possibly in the lens of somebody's, rifle, a target, so to speak. And probably the worst day of his whole time in the military was 8 o'clock in the morning. And I was just getting up. I had not moved from the bed yet. And the phone rang. And a lot of times, I am not this person that jumps for the phone. It's like, there's an answer machine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not here. It's okay. John is usually the one that jumps and gets the phone and is a telemarketer, whatever. But, for me, I pick the phone up and the first words I hear is, "This is Staff Sergeant blah, 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 calling from blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, and not even realizing that if he was dead, they would be at my door. Maybe I wouldn't get a phone call, but that didn't even occur to me, and telling me that he had been injured. And, he said he's injured. It's not life-threatening. He's okay. He made sure to say that right away.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's made these phone calls many times. But talk about traumatic. And then not being able to be there and touch him. He was in Iraq. Then they flew him to Europe to do this, But then there came the other side of it, and that was the answers to prayer. When he had got the injury that he did, guess who was at the ER? It was someone that worked with bone injuries.
Oh.
Right there.
So injuries, what happened to him?
He lost a finger.
He lost a finger.
He lost a finger. And so obviously he went right, they took him, went right there, and right on duty at that moment was someone whose specialty was orthopedics, and he gave him, "You can do this, you could do this, you could do this, I suggest this." And somebody else may not have been able to say that. And it influenced the choices that he made on how to deal with his injury. That would have changed the ability for him to use his hands forever.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's an answer to prayer.
Yeah, out of a bad thing that happened, something good
Came, and then he
happen.
went to Europe and recovered there. And I think probably the most other traumatic thing was when he was on his way home. And of course, he had his duffel bag and he had his military garb, and he was coming through TSA. And of course, his hand is all wrapped. And they made him unwrap his bandage.
Jeez.
Because
The TSA agents.
they took him in a room and said, we got to see if there's metal. And I said, he's in the military. And I was so angry.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to just punch that guy.
What years were this?
Oh gosh, Jack, now you're straining my brain. But this was
Over 10 years ago.
Over 10 years ago. Yeah, I mean, things were just getting started, and who knows? We were collecting nail clippers at that point. We've gone much further along.
Right. There was a lot of
sense.
uncertainty.
Because this is post 9/11.
Post 9/11, a lot of uncertainty for a number of years.
Post 9/11, and then the worst thing about him unwrapping it all is they left him in the room to rewrap it himself. When I was like, oh, he's just bleeding.
Did he have any?
Just bleeding.
What's his comment about that?
Well, he just thought it was stupid as a rock. It's like, right. Here I am. I've got my ID. I've got my orders. I've got, and there was just someone that was over enthusiastic in doing their role and not getting it with the military again, maybe too. Understanding this guy has PTSD and he's coming out of a military zone, and all of these other things, not even knowing all of the byproducts of it. So that was hard. That was really
I can
hard
tell.
on me.
Yeah. So how do you think that affects you now?
I think now you become so much more aware of everything, with what happens. And you are aware of so much of what's happening that doesn't show in a bandage. And it doesn't show in a pair of crutches. You can look into a young man's eyes and go, hello, how are you? And be willing to hear it and understand where it comes from.
Do you know any female veterans or females that served in the military, Debbie?
I'm sure that I probably do.
I was just asking because I'm just
thinking of
because
that.
I think in terms of unseen, I think women have injuries as well.
Absolutely.
And they have concerns as well who served, and they, sometimes they don't get the attention.
Right.
I think.
Well, this is all it's becoming fresh in my mind, the way Dad, Chaplain Clue, whatever we want to call you on this, the way Chaplain Jack Clue has described having people come and speak with us.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't want to go to a certain point because he wants to make sure they can come back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that a big deal? Why can't they just talk about everything? I can talk about everything. What's the big deal with this?
Mm-hmm.
And so to hear kind of the, I don't know if it's severity, but the, what would be the word? The importance, you're just trying the depth of what's behind their experiences.
Yeah.
That is a regular everyday civilian like myself, or someone who hasn't been in a situation that has life-threatening for their
And
friends.
what comes to my mind,
can't understand.
and why I pull the reins and say slow the wagon down is I think that's sacred territory, and I think you need to have permission to go there. And then what's the risk if you get stuck there?
Yeah,
So
and
these things are going in my mind when talking. So we kind of want people to talk about whatever they want, but
Right.
I'm not trying to vicariously live their
Mm-hmm.
experience by asking.
Right.
But I'm just amazed at when I just hearing from you saying, kind of repeating what we've seen, is just how quickly people can get to that place,
Mhm.
just in their mind, and just
Very
how it's
quickly.
even there. It's
Right.
to me,
It's a picture and it's an imprint. And, the goal is to have the elasticity to be able to remember that and know that that was then. And the elasticity, and I think that comes through your strength in Jesus Christ and the healing that comes from working with people like yourself and people that we have out there these days that were not there
Well,
15, 20 years ago.
and so I'll use this opportunity to highlight the VA programs in terms of, especially with PTSD, moral injury, spiritual injury, all these different things. Go there. I've
Yes.
gone, I've had 2 things that I needed to go twice for pretty long stays, and I am grateful for it. I am
Yes.
absolutely grateful for it. And the VA can't do everything. And one of the things they can't do is love me when I'm not there.
Right.
They can't follow me when I'm not there. And that's where I think the family of God comes in. That's where individuals who have insight and empathy play
Hey, are those
a big
programs?
role.
Here's a question: are those programs? Are they for weak people, or are they, or even the strong people come out of it? Because I think I've mentioned this when we've just been talking off of the microphone. I get this idea of like the Rambo type. Everybody who comes out there strong, and but are the strong people? Do they need those things too? Do you think everybody does? Every military veteran, does everybody suffer, or do they suffer in different ways?
Who's the question?
To either of you. I mean, you
Go
both
ahead.
have experienced it.
Well, my experience is it's not a matter of strength; it's a matter of need. And so I've said for many years, if my car is broke down, I don't go to a baker; I go to a mechanic. And so we wanted to go to the best and most qualified person who can help me. And I think I think Rambo movies, glorify the military, the wartime experience. As it's been said before, there's no music in real life. In other words, there's no symphony playing in the background. And
There's no script.
there's no, and so I don't want to look at this in terms of I'm weak. I know I felt that way, but then you think about it, here's a pathway to get help, and it's not going to cost me anything. That makes good sense. That's a smart person making that decision, not a weak person.
Well, it takes a person of strength and courage to walk that path.
Yeah.
To be, to stand up and walk that path.
And people that need the kind of care that the VA has, and we're talking about psychological and emotional care, but also just, the medical as well. You don't have to be in a combat zone to need that.
Exactly.
I know many people, they think the VA is there for poor people. It's for veterans that can't afford medical care. If you served, my recommendation is pick up the phone, call them, and ask for the eligibility office and say, hey, let's just say your son or daughter won't go get help. Just say, I'm calling my son or daughter. I'm trying to find out if they are eligible for VA care, and let them begin the process and help you figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, did that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'm thinking something else too. So we're talking about communication. I'm just remembering when you said that they called you and they said your son was hurt. Kathy Krogstad in the last podcast was talking about, and you asked about questions about these phone calls that they would get and how they would fill her in and what kind of things they would talk about. Was it like that with John with you? I mean, were there things that he could, when he called you, he could say, he couldn't say? How did you guys communicate back and forth? Was it pretty open, or was there things that you knew he wasn't telling you?
Well, I knew that he could tell me so much, that he couldn't tell me everything because then it would violate a mission that was going on, So I knew that he couldn't tell me everything, but he could tell me enough to know that he was safe, and sometimes where he was, I knew he was, maybe he was in South America. That's where it was most touchy, when he did his C-130, thing down there. But after he was off the ground, we just left Honduras, or we just, going to.
Were those calls important to you? Were they?
Oh, yeah. And, I thought it was really great when we were in Alaska, especially. He wasn't doing that kind of traveling here. Most of it was transport, intrastates. He wasn't out of the country. He was just all over in a lot of ways, transporting people and equipment. But the missions that they were on, it was a different mission out of the Alaska, Anchorage. Coulis is where he was stationed out of. And they were good at transitioning those phone calls. They would take it and they would patch me into a phone system, if to communicate if necessary. One of the that kind of happened, and it was really great. John was on a mission and his mother passed away, and the first thing they did is patch through a phone call to John so I could talk to him, and then make sure they brought him back so he could participate and be there with the family. So the Air Force took care of us in that mode. When something traumatic happened like that, if something were to happen to your child, if something were to happen to me, they would get that guy home.
They're very good when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Very excellent.
Well, we're going to start landing the plane here, Debbie, but I had a couple other questions here that I think would be helpful. Was there a favorite or a high point in, let's just say, the 30 years, even in your first marriage, was there ever a high point when you go back to that, say, yeah, that was a good experience?
Well, I think the good experience was pinning the wings on.
Oh, John.
Yeah, that was a great experience. The other one was the transition and the opportunity to come to North Dakota.
Oh.
Because it was an outright amazing military opportunity. John had gotten those hours that he'd been gone all that time, and he got a phone call while he was on his way to Hawaii. He was always going these great places, and they wanted to know, he found out about this posting for a position in Fargo, North Dakota with the hooligans, and they called him, and he came down here. He interviewed, and he took it. And he came back home. And guess what? He had a job. He got to do what he loved to do. I got to quit work and stay home and be a mom. I never had that opportunity before. I did get left with selling the house.
Oh, not fun.
Yeah. Working, selling the house, taking care of the child, saying the goodbyes. All of those things which are part of it. But it was the most exciting, pinpointed time of driving down the Alcan with our pop-up camper and having Top Gun playing, going, oh my gosh, we are going to North Dakota. Who would have thunk?
Yeah.
And to me, being the gypsy, that was just fine. And one other kind of funny thing is the difference when you are a military wife and your husband is gone a lot is that you really don't have a social platform to connect with. You are not single and you are not married. You are not included in either group. And, I'm not going to go out and do the social things that single people do. And I am not included in the things that couples do because I was not a couple. In fact, one of the funny things is I told couple of our friends. I said, well, I'm going to take one of John's flight suits and stuff it with straw and take a big photo and put on the top of it. And if I do that, will you invite me somewhere?
Right.
If I bring my John doll?
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's like trying to make a point, but I
Right.
don't think anybody got it.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, the high point was coming here, even though I fought being in North Dakota and thinking I was going to leave after 16 or 17 years. This is home.
Well, and I've said many times, why go to Florida in February when you can have minus 55 degrees outside in Fargo?
There you go.
One last question. I might keep looking back. How do you think your life overall was affected by your military experience?
Oh my goodness.
Then let me paint
think.
it for you. Think as a family, as a mother, a wife, a believer. These. How do you think
All areas.
overall?
Overall, I think going to a more a unique place of serving in the military has strengthened me. It has made me a woman of courage. It's made me a woman of bravery. It has driven a depth of character. It has broadened and deepened my spiritual walk with the Lord. I don't think I would be the woman I am today without the experience. I don't.
Wow, that's good stuff. And it's causing me to think, Jack, when we do this, we could think of themes to have in a call for a month or two, because a lot of people talk about PTSD and moral injury, but they don't talk about, what's it called? Moral repair, or the healthiness that you can. I once was broken, but now I'm not.
Right.
That.
Right. I remember those times when Blake was overseas. I could not watch war movies. I could not. That was too close.
The term just came to me: post-traumatic growth. So
Yes,
how does a difficult time change you? Scripture has lots to say about that.
It's again that elasticity. You're over here and you're stretched and you're stretched and you're stretched. And then what you do about it will cause you to launch forward and be even further down the road than you were to begin with.
Yeah, I've often heard it said a huge setback is the material that God uses for a great comeback.
Yeah,
and there's lots of ways we can talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Debbie, for coming.
Thank you.
We'll probably have you come back, I think, because it's just made me think of different ways to help people understand the military experience. I think I asked Kathy, do you have a favorite scripture that guides you or anything like that? Put me on the spot here.
There's so many of them. One is never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. And Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever.